See, people are starting to join us. Good morning. Or good afternoon. I know you're right on the cusp in the UK, already the afternoon for those in Europe.
We'll just do the Truman Show opening. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
For those of you joining us, we're going to continually just post the Nearpod link for today's meeting in the chat. Thank you, Saris. You could just join that. It will be an interactive session, so you'll want to make sure that you are in that Nearpod. Good morning, those of you just coming in. We'll be giving it a few minutes until the top of the hour to get started, just to let people keep trickling in. And for those in the UK and in Europe, we're right around lunchtime. So I have a feeling we might see people pop in, pop out, which is totally fine. This is all being recorded, so we'll be sending out the recording afterwards. But if you could go ahead and just join the Nearpod that is in the chat. Oh, sent that to the hosts and the panelists. Let me send that to everyone. There we go. While we wait for others to join, if you'd like to just drop in the chat where you're joining us from. Hello, hello, for those of you just joining. Emma from Manchester, good afternoon. Hello, Juliana in Ukraine. Kelly in Ulster University. Just chatted with your team the other day, so welcome. Colchester, Bristol. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. All right, for those of you just joining, we're going to drop the join link for today's Nearpod in the chat. So you can either click on the link with the session code or go to nearpod.com and type in that code KD, Z, or Z, depending on where you're coming and joining from today. Natalie, good morning, very early morning from Maryland.
Thank you very much for getting up for this.
We'll give it a couple of minutes here yet. People are still slowly trickling in. But as I said, if you could please join that Nearpod today, that would be great. It's going to be filled with different interactive pieces that you'll want to make sure that you're able to take part in. So please go ahead and join that.
In a second, I'll also share my screen so that we've got it for the recording. For those that maybe can't, for whatever reason, join that. So,
hello, hello to those joining. Good morning, good afternoon. Afternoon, afternoon.
Hey, Bavin.
All right, for those still joining, I'm going to put the link in there again. If you could please join that Nearpod today. Hello, 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 everyone. Good morning and good afternoon. I'll throw the link in there once more. We still have people joining. I'm going to make sure that you have access to that Nearpod link. And we'll get started here in just a second. Hello to all who are still joining. Let's give it like 20 more seconds and then we'll get underway. We have a very special guest today that we're excited to have with us. And we have a lot, or he has specifically. I'm really not bringing much to the table today. Tom is bringing the full, all of the content for you today, which we're really excited about. It's the reason we're all here. We'll dive into that in just a second. Just to give you an overview, to kind of touch on a few things. First, if you could please join that Nearpod. That's where we want to start. Awesome. Still got people joining. Just join the Nearpod for us. This session is being recorded, so we will be sending out a recording of this session later for you to be able to watch over. I know for those in the UK and in Europe, depending on what time zones you're in, this is probably right around your lunchtime. So if you need to kind of pop out or pop in, whatever it might be, totally fine. This will be recorded and shared out. If you have any questions throughout the session, feel free to drop them in the chat. I have a few colleagues here who will be ready to address questions as they come in. If you have questions that are specific for Tom, I'll kind of post those or tag them, kind of posted them to the board in the background, and we'll circle back around to those likely at the end of the session. And then we'll address any kind of, we'll say, general Nearpod questions as we go through the session with you. All right, let's go ahead and jump into things. Again, thank you all for joining this morning or afternoon. My name is Zach Bookman. I'm one of the customer success managers here at Nearpod. I work predominantly with higher ed and enterprise institutions. So if it's not a US K-12 school, I get to work with you. So I'm joined today by one of our partners, Thomas Langston from the University of Portsmouth. Thomas Langston is the digital learning and teaching specialist at the university. And he has worked in education for over 20 years and has seen the growth of digital educational tools. And especially over the past few years, you can only imagine how dramatically that realm has changed and evolved. He specializes in student engagement through co-creation and is passionate about supporting pedagogical, robust teaching using digital platforms, which kind of hits on exactly what we're going to be talking a lot about today. So Thomas, thanks for joining us. Really excited to have you. I'll go ahead and turn things over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for taking the time out today. Wherever you are in the world, I will share my screen. There we go. So hopefully you can see that. So the title of today's session is 3 Surprising Ways to Use Nearpod, which was a title that Sarah suggested. And I was like, I like that challenge. It's a bit clickbaity and I have to find 3 things to do. It was much more interesting than my original title of supporting academic teams with a blended learning environment. So we'll go with that one instead. I wanted to start briefly with a little bit of the science bit for those who remember the L'Oreal advert. The reason I like using Nearpod and sort of similar kind of sort of products for student engagement specifically is I, as a learner, have a very short attention span. My brain flicks around all the time doing lots and lots of different bits because that's just who I am. Using things like this, I would have loved when I was growing up. They weren't there. I'm older than I look. And for me, the idea of cognitive load is what we're doing and what we're having to sort of deal with our students, where if you sit and talk to them, like this constantly for the whole sort of hour of a session, they're not going to remember it all. It's not going to go in. But by jumping around, giving them different bits and giving them different ways to interact with that material, it will go from sort of the short-term memory into their working memory into their long-term memory. It's this element of interactivity. So this is why Nearpod for me is a really good sort of starting point. If you've never used it before, I'll show you a few things that we've done. We'll get to the three surprising tips. But it's however you do your teaching, it's definitely about getting the students to engage and take part in what they're doing. So the one that I'm going to sort of go over mostly today, and I won't really mention it again as a thing though, is the intrinsic kind of cognitive load, where the complexity of what's being taught is also then taken with the expertise of the learner. So if a student that you're teaching, and this is why it can be quite difficult in class, a student that has a high level of expertise coming into your lecture will find what you're teaching easily. So you will have to up the sort of complexity of that. And by doing that, you're challenging them. But equally, you don't want to sort of take it too far the other way so that other people can't do it. So this is where things like this, and something called inquiry-guided learning, is where the student puts back into the lecture and puts back into their kind of learning. And what will happen is everyone can kind of follow you, and you can basically sort of target individuals because of, again, the back end of Nearpod, and I'll again show you some of that as we go through. Simplified, the whole science bit in a nutshell. If you put too much emphasis on one area, the learning decreases. So too much text, no interaction, students aren't going to be able to retain it. They'll make their notes. Whether they can then process and remember what those notes mean is another question. Spread how people engage across the entire course. So not just in one lecture, but how can you sort of tie things together through the entire process of your teaching? And the don't add noise goes to the extraneous cognitive load from the previous slide. And like I said, I didn't want to go over it too much. But the more that you give people, the more they have to remember, and the more their brain will struggle to kind of retain the bits that are really useful to you. So again, what you want to do is aid people's own research and give them sort of points, flags in the sand, as it were, that allow them to get to where they want to go. Because again, within your subject, there will be certain bits that people maybe have a more specialized interest in than others. So by having too much of everything without them finding it themselves, it can be a bit of a problem with how much they will remember. There we go. So that's the science bit over. This is using what's called the Collaborate board within Nearpod. And what I wanted to do first was to ask you a question. This is kind of where I get my sort of love of co-creation from. And what are the most creative ways over the last 2 years, and maybe even before that, have you supported sort of blended or hybrid learning, that kind of sort of mix that we have now of online webinar-y sort of sessions or face-to-face sessions, or things that are maybe sort of more seminar driven, where you are having that more conversational element over a lecture. So please feel free to add to this how you've creatively supported any learning and teaching, depending on your role here. So while people are doing that, what I will say is I like the Nearpod Collaborate board, because it means that, as you can see here, the student side that I'm sharing, it's anonymous. So for you on your devices, it does not show who everyone is, but on my sort of admin panel, and I'll do it a bit later, I can see who's put things in. So again, today it doesn't really matter, but when you're teaching, and if you're working with students on a regular basis, this will help you target a student and sort of say, do you need support in this area? Can I help you with this? So add blogs and wikis for discussion. Yeah, that's a really good way of getting a sort of that sort of long-term narrative of getting them to add and sort of redevelop material. Shared notes. Yes, I'm a big fan of things like Google Drive or Microsoft OneNote. Again, there's lots of sort of similar tools there, but that kind of shared document that everyone can actually sort of collaborate with and generate stuff. One I did hear about, and actually you could do this using the Twitter module within Nearpod, but one of the things I heard a while ago was where students used to take their notes in a kind of a closed Twitter group. What they would do is essentially create a profile just for their teaching and learning, follow only their sort of classmates and make the account private. And what they would then do is take their notes so that everyone had that shared note. So if someone missed a week, they could pick up on what was there. The academic could jump in and sort of correct any mistakes, because obviously when people are making notes in class, you don't know how wildly off they are. But this allowed the academic to sort of correct any sort of misunderstandings or answer questions that came out of those notes. So that was a kind of an interesting thing. And I heard that long before lockdown, to be honest, but actually it's a really interesting way I heard of, like I say, using that shared note-taking experience. And again, like I say, you could do that in Google Drive, although Twitter's quite nice because it condenses your thoughts into that 240 character limit. Collaborate board for the whole class discussion, so just like we're doing today. We've got someone here that's provided teachers with training on Padlet, Teams, and Nearpod. So again, it's that wonderful sort of spectrum of sort of tools that we may or may not have access to. What I really like with all of the products kind of out there at the moment is there is some level of free. Something that I'm sure someone like who posted that has met is, if you're supporting academic teaching, academics may come to you from other places and they may like a different product. And it can be really hard sometimes to get people to transition into one that you've bought. So we at the university have a number of licenses that we sort of allow people to use and have the full sort of system that Nearpod provides. Some people come and want to only use what they've used in the past. And from my point of view, I always try to offer support for things like this, but I'd rather they were using something than nothing. And I would rather they support their students in their learning with whatever tool they're comfortable with. So a lot of the time, finding where you're comfortable is a really good start to help that academic engage with it. And once they may be more comfortable, you can then again retry the Nearpod push or whatever it is that you're using. Well, thank you, everyone. Yes, H5P, we use that as well at the university. That's been a really good one for knowledge check. So that interactive content to get students to engage with the learning as they go in a good way. So I'm going to move on to the next slide just for the sake of time. What we did at the university is created a resource. I worked on this with my my colleagues, and Marie was a key part of this, sort of in the design and taking things that were fed back to her. And what we did was using Laurelard's learning types, which if you hover over any of these, it'll tell you what they are. We divided down the tools that we had access to. In the inner ring, it's what's within our virtual learning environment, being Moodle in our case. And then the outer ring are the sort of softwares that are sort of adjunct to this. So they may feed into Moodle, but they're a third party software, but we have access. Now, under practice, which if we look on that, enables learners to adapt their actions to task goals, get feedback and do self-reflection. Nearpod does that really well in a whole range of ways. We've put this little page together, but what we also try to do is say, actually, while it's useful in one area, one learning type, you can actually use it in others. You can use it for collaboration. You can also use it for investigation and acquisition, which was essentially like using PowerPoint just to talk to people. So what we did was used genially to produce this resource to help people understand across this kind of blended time that there's a lot of different things that we can do to support our teaching, and that is useful. And so, in a few approaches and examples for Nearpod that we used within teaching, and again, I know lots of people have taken it their own way and done some very creative things. Co-creation is, as Zach mentioned, one that's kind of close to my heart. It's getting that sort of student voice and student experience to be part of your teaching. Co-creation, I'll come to in a second as well, but there's a whole range of levels of co-creation that you can do that you need to be comfortable with. It's not something you'd necessarily run completely wild and free, but there are things you can do to, again, make it that the student has that voice and buy-in. We use Nearpod for doing that knowledge check, exams and quizzes. In fairness, I don't think anyone's used it as a sort of full-on quiz. We use sort of the Moodle quiz for that, where it's actually under time-sensitive pressures. But for that knowledge check, quiz and testing, and kind of the fun time to climb level sort of examinations in the class that can be a bit more fun, we've definitely used Nearpod for those. Group work, I'll get to that again in a little bit, but what we've done with Nearpod is use it to sort of take us through the narrative of the kind of the presentation, but added in bits where people using a Collaborate board can have that discussion and come back to it. So, Surprising Way number 1, co-creation and collaboration. Now, that's not necessarily that surprising, but I think what is surprising is the different levels you can do it. This is a diagram I found online based around Boville and Bully's ladder of co-creation. So at the bottom of that, you can see the teacher controls everything. You create the learning outcomes, you can create the assessments, you create the lectures, you create the content, you give it to them, and the student has no control over that process. It's all, and that's the bottom of the ladder, all the way up to that staff-student partnership where students have full control of their own learning. They create the learning outcomes, they create the assessment, they create absolutely everything, and you as the academic sit and ride that out and try and sort of shape where they're going. Now, Boville and Bully do not necessarily advocate that as the way to go for everyone. That would be almost anarchic. Some lecturers do like that, but I wouldn't recommend it. What I would say is where we have the active learning and co-creation of learning and teaching, that middle ground, where the students have that sort of a level of choice and a level of influence to give them that buy-in to what they're doing. Nearpod has done that really well using things like the co-create board. Now, one of the bits, I wrote an article at the beginning of lockdown when we started using Zoom and had the, that black screen of death where everyone's just names and pictures, and you're trying to teach to something. One of the bits I sort of came up with some other colleagues is the idea of getting the students to want to either turn their camera on or have that buy-in to what they're doing. And it's all about expectations of the student. Which brings me to this next activity, he says, hopefully, where what we would normally have when we're teaching in a standard classroom is you may, as a teacher, as the academic at the front, say what you expect from your students. Some people will ask, what do you expect from me? What we didn't kind of do very well when lockdown happened is getting sort of students to look at what they expect of each other as well, because I think that was used to be kind of self-regulatory, where students would leave a classroom and they might have a chat, they'd go and have a drink, they'd have a kind of like, can you please shut up in class, or we need to work on this more. It would be sort of self-regulating. Whereas with Zoom, you turn the thing off, the room shuts down and everyone's gone and you're sat back in the room that you were in before. So there was none of that expectation of each other thing being built. So using Nearpod, what I've done is made this Collaborate board where, and again, feel free to sort of fill this in of what we're doing today, but what would you expect from me as the presenter when you're doing a sort of a webinar? What do you expect of the presenter? Now, again, today's a one-off. I'm very grateful to be here, but chances are I won't necessarily be teaching you anything again in the future. In your teaching of classrooms, when you're starting back in sort of September, you're going to have a whole new load of students that you're going to be working with, maybe online and in classroom, depending on how your university is handling this, where what you want is to try and define what they expect from you. You'll be able to tell them, but how do we get that information from them? How do we find out what they expect from us? What they expect from their fellow participants. It's that sort of social contract. There's, and One of our lecturers specializes in EDI, which stands for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. And she talks very much about that social contract that should be drawn up to start with, about what can be said in the classroom, building that safe space to have maybe sort of problematic discussions or things that may be sort of seen as contentious. So it's building that space. So what do you expect from your fellow participants? Do you expect people to engage? Do you expect people to be able to challenge you? In this case, I did what do you think is expected of you? A webinar, very little, I would suggest. But actually, because we're using Nearpod, for me, having people actually put something down and contribute makes it easier to kind of sort of do a presentation. I like that interaction. I like that discussion. And then I've also added, if there's anything else I've gone over so far that you'd like to question, if you'd like to have ask me anything, please feel free to use that column. So what are we coming in? So you expected me to have some knowledge about sharing Nearpod, to lead a conversation. Hopefully I'm doing that. To engage us and provide new information. So these are obviously things I was expecting to have, and hopefully I will do as the time goes on. What I will do is, I think this came up in another one. What I'm sharing here is on the teacher view, for those people who maybe haven't used Nearpod, there's an interface that I have, which is my staff one, the lecturer version, which I can see everyone's names. Also, I have a menu option that drops down and lets me do presentation view, which is the screen I'm sharing, where it's anonymous to allow for that, which again, the research shows you get more interaction when the comments and things are anonymous from your students, because they feel they can be more open and not judged by their peers for what they may consider a silly answer. So what I'm going to do very quickly is just drag my teacher view over here, so you can see, and again, I'll do it quickly so no one can see who's writing what, but you can see that I have all the names of people, and what I did there was the presentation view. So for me, using Nearpod and to kind of sort of help share my Nearpod knowledge, this is what the academic sees. I can move it on. It's not student paced, so the students yourselves today can't do this on, but I'll make sure that there's a code for this after the fact for people that want to maybe go through the slides afterwards. When the recording's up, I can see how many people I've got in my class, and I can jump around my slides as I need. If I need to share this screen, depending on how you're doing your class, you can actually on the fly hide the student names, but still show your teacher view. I still prefer to sort of see everything myself, and then just use the other view over there. So interact with presenter and group. So what you're expecting from your fellow students and fellow participants today is what is happening. Again, it makes my life easier to be able to sort of talk about these kind of ideas and get new ideas from you, and to get new ideas of what people do. Right, I'm going to move on to the next slide. So surprising way number 2, involvement in the process. I mentioned at the beginning about inquiry-guided learning. So involvement in the process is not just that collaboration and just putting something in. It's about challenging the student to, as you can see sort of down here, within the active learning sphere, they're doing problem-based learning. They're doing research. They're doing something that adds to the conversation that is being had. So let me explain this. This is a draw it. If anyone saw Gavin Knight's presentation last week from the webinar, and again, I'm sure Zach or Sarah will be able to highlight where the recording for that will be. Gavin is a big fan of Draw It because you can annotate the screen. It's one of the only sort of systems that we have where you can share an image and people can draw on it, highlight things, and it becomes really useful. I like it from a blank slide. I like this idea of people can upload images, they can write text using the different controls. So what I wanted to kind of highlight is where I do these presentations normally, because of working with Gavin quite heavily, most of my examples come from the idea of science. So where I've got find X examples of, what I'm trying to say there is find examples of maybe things like respiratory problems. The student has to go out and find some images of damaged lungs and then explain on an annotation what they found and what it means. What they're doing with inquiry-guided learning here is adding something to the draw it and demonstrating that they understand what they're looking at. They demonstrate the problems that are being had. Now, if you're not a scientist, that's going to be completely irrelevant to you. For me, in this sort of surprising fact number 2, is you can do it for everything. You've just got to kind of be creative in your thinking. So I said, find a few examples maybe of passages from Shakespeare that you think highlight, let's see, what's Shakespeare good at? Well, you could do love as a standard one, or maybe madness. King Lear would be fantastic for that. You could use it to share passages from journal articles to show that, again, the student is demonstrating their understanding of the subject. If in this case, feel free to put absolutely anything. Maybe find an example of something that you think relates to your subject, something that relates to your subject matter and your areas. So what I will then get is all these kind of images through for Draw It, and I will be able to share individual sort of items and demonstrate to people anonymously examples that I think are relevant to what we're talking about. Oh, that's new. I got a little bit confused as I haven't used the Draw It for a while. There's just to kind of show everyone this. This is what it looks like, obviously, to the student. I've got a tab or a toggle at the top, and I can switch to the teacher, and I can then see what answers everyone is putting in. So let me give you a second to put some of those, to put some answers up, and I can see a few people doing that. So again, thank you very much. But for me, this comes into the fact that we're not just talking at our students. And again, it can get really quiet and uncomfortable. And it's something for a webinar, I haven't got the time to sit and be quiet. But where you're setting this kind of task, it's going to be, especially when you're not in an actual classroom where you're sat here, it can get very unnerving sitting on your own in a quiet room. So if I could ask you to submit some answers for me, I can see a few people have done that now. Thank you very much. What I will do is I will share. So I think this one's a really nice sort of start. If music be the food of love, play on. Food brings people together, and it's explaining why that's maybe a meaningful passage to someone. This is one I think someone's put in from their own subject area of reflection. When we're teaching, it's always good to have a reflective model. I currently like sort of Stephen Brookfield's lenses, the sort of the 4-lens reflection of yourself, the literature, what your students feel, and what your colleagues feel. And it's trying to build a picture. But again, Gibbs, I think, also works really well in that sort of cyclical process, whereas Brookfield is getting you to look at the things in different ways. It's not necessarily in a sort of a state. So you could, and what I quite like about reflection is you can take bits of multiple models to make what works for you and help you become a better teacher. Going down the science route, here we have some lung problems, no annotations this time, but you could very easily ask them to do levels of annotation or something like that. There we go. And you can get them to add just text as well. So I think I've shown enough to sort of make my point here that I have a whole range of different images and things that people have submitted for me. So again, thank you very much for doing that. But it meant that you as the student, as the participant here, had to become really engaged and do some research. Go and think about the question that was asked of you and put that in. So for me, that I think, is a key part of learning. It's spreading that cognitive load, using the inquiry-guided learning process, making an active, engaged part of the lesson, and not just talking at people. And my final one is Surprising Way, number 3, course and module design. We at the university have taken a range of different models for active blended learning and made our own version of it here in Able. What this is doing is helping maybe sort of new creation of modules, or modules that maybe need a bit of a revamp, to have a look at what is expected and what they can do to improve themselves. I won't name any names, not that anyone here would know necessarily who they are, but we did an Able workshop where we sat down with the course team and looked at how they structured their course historically. And it was all very traditional. It was teach them this theory, give them this exam, or give them this essay to write, and then we mark it. And we sort of said, is there any ways of giving them the information differently? Is there any way that they could find out about the literature and theory without you just telling them? How else could you get them to do it? And then when it came to the assessment, rather than it being an essay, could you do it another way? Could you get them to do an audio broadcast, a podcast, something else, maybe a poster? And it was getting and challenging them using this Enable process, which I will go over in a moment as well, to think about teaching. So this, using Nearpod for this, was not about doing it with students. It's about working with staff. So we have, for instance, these interactive PDFs. This card exercise that we do in class is one that we do like doing in person, where they, you're physically talking to people. But actually, what we're able to do is give them this, get them to do sort of just have a discussion about it, and then just using Nearpod with the interactive PDF, they can make their own notes and come to their own conclusions inside Nearpod. They can annotate this PDF. Now, it may not save it, but it does get them to start thinking about what all these different bits and pieces mean, and get them to do the activities together, maybe in a breakout room, in Zoom, Teams, whatever the system is you use for your kind of conferencing. We also did it where we were hoping to do it live and face-to-face, but we couldn't, and it got recreated into an online space. So what we did was that PDF that I just showed, we made it in Padlet. Now, I'm fully aware that Padlet and the collaborative board in Nearpod share very similar sort of traits and bits and pieces. And usually I would sort of maybe advocate using just one system to keep it simple. However, the one thing that we weren't able to do at this time within Nearpod was get them to drag the cards and sort what they wanted. So there were 4 sets, all of different color codes, and they had to say which ones they think are important in their teaching. So for me, accessibility is really important in the teaching, so they had to drag that there. They wanted debate, so we're going to have debate. We don't really want self-assessment. What we want is feed-forward assessment. So you build the activities through the cards, and then it became, out of this list, what are your top 6 non-negotiable features to building your course and building your modules? Now, accessibility, we decided not to put into the top 6 one, not because we don't think it's important, it's very important, but it's also law. So it's got to be there anyway. So whether we want to negotiate it or not, actually we can leave it out of that and be a bit more creative and dynamic with how we were going to be doing our module design. So this top 6 negotiable features allows you to really interrogate. And what we then wanted them to do was to create one of their own. What is your 7th non-negotiable feature? So you end up with 7 items, 6 that we had from the list, and 1 that you think frames maybe and develops absolutely everything. And we then also have the option to ask another question of what do you think that each color sort of represents. And we did this online with about 100 people, and it worked really well. Yes, we would have preferred to do it in person, but we were able to use Nearpod to do a presentation, add the activity, and get people to do this in groups. with this idea of module design, and before we end off and sort of go to questions, I wanted to kind of demonstrate using the open-ended sort of question tool, how you could use it as a course team to try and get different answers and find out what people think. So for instance, today I'm asking you, how do you currently design your assessment? What would your assessment look like if you had complete freedom to do what you like? Say there's no limits to this, there's no one line manager saying, no, you can't do that. What would you like to do completely? And if you couldn't run it how you want to currently do it, what would your assessment look like? So it's that kind of asking a few questions that people can then sort of answer. And again, while no one's putting anything in at the moment, I'll share that. So from me, I have the list of all the people who are here today, and their answers get put into this for me. So I'm then able to, again, share it globally, but anonymously, and have that discussion. Again, today is not that space for the direct discussion maybe, but if you're doing this with, like I say, with a few colleagues, actually use this to make the notes, and you go from there and just have that discussion as it goes through. And I think that's, for me, one of the sort of surprising bits is it doesn't have to be just staff, just students that we do this with. We can use Nearpod to do presentations to colleagues and use it as kind of an interactive tool as part of that. The other nice bit is it can embed in a website. It can embed inside a VLE. Like I say, we use Moodle. But you can embed that kind of student-paced activity inside there and get people to do it in their own time before or after a meeting. So you maybe set it up before, people go and put stuff in, and then you have that meeting and start to kind of sort of try and do it rather than doing it like we are now on the fly. I like this answer here. I'm going to share this answer. So sorry if you're still typing. I'll give you just a few seconds actually to put some other bits in. Right. I'm going to share this answer here. A variety of ways, different tools to help prevent fatigue and keep it interesting for the learner. And I think that's a really key bit for me, for that student engagement. There's a bit, that co-creation bit as well, is if you're able to help allow them to design how that might be, how they get that variety of assessment, if you're able to allow them that sort of say, we found that there is more engagement overall and better results at the end of it. It's kind of the almost it's too obvious to pass over, but it's amazing that bit that if people don't buy into something that they're doing, they just don't do it well or do it at all. One of the ones that the university used to do, and I think the only reason it stopped was we ran out of places in the UK to do it. Within our geography department, an academic used to run his assessment through Wikipedia, live out there Wikipedia. And what he got the students to do was, in small groups, find a local UK village, hamlet, small town, that doesn't have a Wikipedia page or any information on it. And they had to then write that page up. They had to research it. And that meant they had to do it through public libraries. They had to go and visit the place, try and find other historical data, because the whole thing normally would people would go to Wikipedia to find this information, but there was no Wikipedia page to get that general information. They had to create it. And what was found was that because it was public facing, because it was collaborative, and because it was challenging, it got very good grades, it got very good engagement, and the quality of work was absolutely fantastic, because that public facing nature of it meant people thought, well, it's not just going to be my academic sees it, so I might just rush it. Everyone can see this. It's on Wikipedia. So with that kind of variety of ways of doing different tools, things like blogs and Wikipedia that people mentioned in the Collaborate board earlier, by producing a public facing blog around your subject and getting them to engage in that kind of process, hopefully they will get more engaged in the fact that it's going to be seen. Gavin, I think, was talking last week about his Twitter experience of doing basically summarizing very academic science and scientific papers into tweets, and that was the assessment. It's about that synthesis of information and distilling it down to people. And so he's taken, summarized this paper to a very different level. And again, it's getting really good results from what he's telling me so far. Another really good one here, training videos and resources designed, performed and recorded by the students, getting them to actually do something different rather than just writing an essay. And obviously writing an essay is a very valuable skill. So I think there needs to be at some level that kind of assessment. It does still need to be there. I wouldn't advocate for getting rid of it, but I do think there are times where we can do maybe a range of activities that are bits of that. Maybe after that training video, it would be a reflective report of 1,000 words or something. So they have to get the writing skill, learn how to write, but equally it's a sort of a reflective piece rather than the overall assessment. Other people saying similar things of different sort of facets to their assessment, which is always nice to see. I have a sad face. I'm going to share just for the sad face. Paper-based, project-based assessment using platforms such as Google Workspace, Nearpod, and blogging platforms is what I expect they'd like to do. From our side of it, doing the enable workshops and things, is it's challenging to people to find out why they feel they're fixed to that paper-based approach, or why they're fixed to a particular method. For us, the enable process is about challenging academics. It's not a workshop in the same way that we do something like this and talk to people and give them ideas. They come in with stuff for us to challenge, and they discuss it as a team. And it's that team approach that we sit back then and let them design things and discuss things. So for us, Nearpod really helped with that for doing certain activities going forward. So thank you very much for everyone who's put something in there. And the last slide, I believe, and not to keep it too long, is any other questions? Is there anything else I think that I've missed? Is there anything that you'd like to know about Nearpod? Have I said anything today that's not been that shocking? And if that's the case, then go with my other name of this slide of ways to help blended learning. So for that, it's actually just using a PDF uploader. Let me see if I can do this session. Okay, so here's I wouldn't recommend anyone has as messy a back end to Nearpod than I do, so make sure you do your folders and keep it tidy. When you're adding a content or activity, it is just, he says, PDF viewer. I just uploaded a PDF, an interactive PDF, which was created within Adobe itself, but then I just upload it here, and because of how Nearpod works, it just allows you to still interact with it. I don't believe, and maybe Zach can answer this one for me, it won't save that interaction that you've done, but it will allow that kind of conversational approach to just getting people to put ideas down. Can you share everything created by all participants with them download or in some other way? I believe, well, you get the end of session reports, which you can download as Excel. Obviously, that will contain the names, which you may or may not want to share. You could, because it comes in an Excel spreadsheet, or is it a CSV or is it actually Excel? Is that, do you know?
You can do a CSV or a PDF.
So if you did a CSV, that would open in Excel, and you could then take out all the names and any naming columns, and then give them all the information that was shared from that session, or take out the bits that you want.
You could also take notes from the participant perspective. If you click an arrow, I think it's on your, what is it, right top, there is a black arrow that if you click, there is a note feature. If you take notes, you will receive the complete presentation, including links to the Collaborate.
There you go. Yeah, thank you very much, Fanny. And someone else has also just told you can use the notes option. Yes, the notes option will give them any notes they've made and the entire presentation afterwards, and like say links to the Collaborate board, but you may very well want to again download the report to give them kind of everything as a data sheet. Are the resources you have shared free to use? If that's the enable stuff, yes, it's all done under Creative Commons license and on the website, which is enable.port.ac.uk. I can put that in the chat if people want it as well. I can make that available afterwards as well if needed. In the Zoom chat is the link to enable.port.ac.uk. If there are no other questions, I will say thank you very much for your time today in attending. Oh, is there an activity I like not showcased today? There's lots. That's part of the problem. So for me, I like time to climates. I like that silly kind of gamification side of things. I think it's really good for students. And that I think Flipgrid is really good. It's always made my head melt a little bit. But I like the idea that the students can upload video and kind of have a discussion about stuff using that. I think that works sort of really nicely. What I would say is they're all really good tools and not kind of outside of Nearpod itself. What I always try and get academics to sort of think about is what is it they want to do? Don't sort of think, oh, I want to use an activity, so I'm going to then try and shoehorn your teaching into that, because ultimately it becomes quite clunky and it becomes disjointed and the students don't necessarily engage with it. Whereas if actually you've got a fixed vision of what you want to do, so like you saw with the Padlet with the activity, we had the activity we wanted to run and we found the tool that did it for us in the way that it was going to work for an online session. What we'd have preferred is, again, sitting in a room with cards. Wasn't possible at the time. I think we came out of lockdown the day after, so that was just frustration and stuff on our part. But yeah, I think always start with what it is you want to do, and always start with the teaching rather than the tool. I think Nearpod is fantastic. I think lots of other software similar to it is really useful. But I think they serve we shouldn't be using them to drive our teaching. What we should do is take our teaching and use that to push it forward. And the reason we keep paying for it is because it does. There's a colleague on here today who I know uses it quite a lot and very clearly. And again, Gavin, who's presented as well. They've found things that Nearpod does perfectly for them and actually get really good results from their teaching and understanding from the students, because it has a purpose and a meaning, and Nearpod facilitated that. It didn't drive it. You're welcome about the Explore wheel. I think that's at explore.port.ac.uk as well. Like I say, that works for us because obviously they're the tools that we pay for. It may be different at your institution. And obviously there are lots of other tools that aren't on there, but we've left them off just to try and keep it as tidy as possible. But again, if it gives you some ideas, then fantastic.
Awesome. I don't think we have any other questions in the chat box either. I've been keeping an eye out for anything there, but Tom, I think you've kept your presentation so engaging that everyone's just put their feedback there. So well done.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, thank you to everyone who's joined. We'll stick around for another couple of minutes just in case you do have any other questions. But if you'd like, you can feel free to reach out to myself or Fanny, or even Tom. You know, if you're at the University of Portsmouth, if you have any questions, we're all here to help out however we can. But if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. But again, thank you all for joining. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day, whether it's first thing in the morning in the US or middle of your afternoon in the UK or in Europe. So thank you all so much.